We're really getting into it today, huh? AI and genocide. Like, I knew this stuff was out there, but the research you sent over is, well, intense is putting it mildly. It's kind of terrifying how close to reality some of this stuff feels.
Yeah, it's not exactly lighthearted reading material. What's striking is how easily this tech, this AI, could be manipulated to make something as calculated and deliberate as genocide even more, well, effective.
Right, it's not some sci-fi future, is it?
Exactly. And to really unpack this, we should use Gregory H. Stanton's 10 Stages of Genocide as a framework.
Okay, good place to start, I guess.
But keep in mind, it's not a checklist, it's not always linear. These stages, they can happen all at the same time, overlap, play off each other.
Gotcha. So it's more like intertwined threads.
Exactly. And one of the most disturbing threads is how AI could act as a force multiplier, making each stage even more, well, potent. And to really understand that, we got to start with, well, the media.
Okay, yeah, AI manipulating information online, right? We've all seen the headlines about that.
Right, but it goes beyond just spreading lies. It's about using that manipulation to actually turn people against each other, setting the stage for something far more sinister.
And that's where those early stages of genocide come in, right?
Precisely. Take stage 1, classification. AI algorithms, especially on social media, they love categorizing people. It's what they're designed to do.
Right, show you ads and stuff based on what you've looked at before.
Exactly. But this seemingly harmless categorization, it can be twisted, you see. Used to reinforce existing prejudices, draw those lines in the sand, that dangerous us versus them mentality.
And that kind of naturally flows into stage 2, right? Symbolization.
Exactly. Think about how easily you get targeted with, say, ads for shoes because you looked at a pair online. Now imagine that same tech, that targeting, used to bombard you with propaganda, fabricated stories, negative symbols, all designed to demonize an entire group.
So like a digital smear campaign, but on a whole other level.
Exactly. And once those narratives take hold, well, that's when it transitions from the virtual world to actual real-world discrimination, stage 3.
But how do you get from like words on a screen to people actually being denied rights, being actively discriminated against?
Control. Imagine AI shaping what news you see, what voices are amplified, and maybe more importantly, what perspectives are completely silenced. It's about restricting access to information, manipulating public discourse with, frankly, a scary level of precision.
It's like that saying, history is written by the victors, but in this case, it's the algorithm deciding who gets to speak and who gets silenced.
Precisely. And once that happens, once those narratives take root, AI can take the manipulation to a whole other level. Deepfakes.
Okay, yeah, those things are creepy.
Right.
Didn't someone make one of, I think it was Tom Cruise once, look just like him?
Right. Deepfakes. They use something called generative adversarial networks, or gens, to create these hyper-realistic fake videos, audio even. It's like two AI algorithms duking it out until they create something incredibly convincing.
Because it looks so real?
Exactly. People believe it. This blurring of reality feeds directly into the dehumanization stage. When you can fabricate evidence, make outrageous claims seem real, you strip away the dignity and individuality of those you're targeting.
And it's hard to argue with evidence, even if it's fake.
Exactly. And that's what makes this so dangerous. It preys on our emotions, makes it easier to dismiss anything that contradicts the fabricated narrative, no matter how well reasoned.
It's like AI is building the foundation for hate.
And to make matters worse, it can then track people in these echo chambers, those filter bubbles we hear about. And that's where stage 6 polarization comes in.
Right, the algorithm's feeding you what you already agree with, making those divisions even deeper.
Exactly. It's like being stuck in a hall of mirrors, your own biases reflected back at you, amplified. And the really scary thing is, this isn't just some hypothetical. We've already seen this play out in a horrific way.
You mean with the Rohingya in Myanmar? The UN called it a textbook case of ethnic cleansing, a modern-day genocide.
And while there were many factors involved, the role of Facebook, their algorithms, in spreading hate speech against the Rohingya was, well, significant, to say the least.
It's horrifying. The algorithm, meant to keep people on the platform, ended up being used to incite violence.
It's a stark reminder of how these tools, AI tools, readily available and incredibly powerful, can be used to devastating effect, even unintentionally. And it underscores the critical need for all of us to be aware of what's happening, how this technology can be used.
Because if it happened there,
it can happen anywhere.
It's scary, how AI can be used to manipulate what we see and hear online. But the research you sent, it went beyond the digital world, didn't it? It talked about AI being used for, surveillance. And That's a whole other level of unsettling.
Absolutely. Think of it this way. We've been talking about AI shaping narratives online. Surveillance, that's about using AI to shape reality itself,
Yeah.
tracking and analyzing people's physical movements, behaviors, all in the real world.
It does feel like something out of like a dystopian sci-fi film, except it's not fiction, is it?
And it's becoming more and more commonplace. We're talking facial recognition that can pick out individuals in crowds, and often with some pretty big question marks about accuracy, especially for people of color.
So you're saying there's bias baked in.
At least the potential for it. And then there's predictive policing. That's where they use algorithms, analyze crime data to try to predict where crimes might happen.
So instead of like recommending products, it's predicting who might commit a crime.
In a nutshell. But those predictions, they're not always right. And they can be skewed by the very data they're based on. Data that can reflect, let's say, pre-existing societal biases.
Which just reinforces those biases, creates a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly. And this tech, it's not hard to see how it could be used to target people based on race, religion, you name it. It's about control. And when we look at the stages of genocide, that's a key factor.
You're talking about using AI to actually identify and target specific groups, like stage 5, organization.
Exactly. Regimes, they don't have to rely on traditional intelligence gathering anymore. AI can sift through massive amounts of data, from surveillance cameras to social media posts, to pinpoint individuals deemed a threat.
And then use that information to move to stage 7, preparation.
You're right.
Planning out the persecution.
You got it. And this is where the predictive power of AI becomes, well, terrifying. Imagine a regime using AI to identify potential opposition leaders before they even emerge, map out social networks, predict where resistance is likely to occur.
It's like giving them a roadmap to crush any dissent before it even has a chance.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just predicting behavior. It's about controlling it. Imagine a world where every move you make is tracked, every conversation monitored.
Okay, now that is straight out of Orwell, 1984. Big Brother is watching you.
And for many, sadly, this isn't just a story. It's reality. The Uyghur crisis in China is a prime example.
That's a situation that I think a lot of people have heard about, but maybe don't fully understand. Can you give us some background?
Sure. The Uyghurs, they're a Muslim minority group, mostly living in the Xinjiang region of China. And over the past several years, the Chinese government, they've been accused of, waging a very systematic campaign against them. Mass detention in these so-called re-education camps, forced labor, and incredibly invasive surveillance.
And this is where AI factors in.
Big time. The Chinese government, they're using facial recognition tech on a massive scale, specifically targeting Uyghurs, tracking their every move. They're also using AI to monitor social media, anything critical of the government censored. And then there's the algorithms used to try to predict who might be sympathetic to the Uyghurs situation. It's incredibly sophisticated and incredibly oppressive.
So it's like AI is being used to create this web of control. You can see how it fits into those stages of genocide. But is this really genocide? Or is it, as some people argue, about combating terrorism?
That's the million-dollar question, and a debate that's raging right now. But when you see the scale of surveillance, the brutality used against the Uyghurs, it's hard not to be deeply disturbed. It underscores just how important it is to be aware of these issues, to speak out against them. Because if it can happen there...
It can happen anywhere. I have to admit, it's kind of hard to see the bright side after those last two segments. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all this, to feel like AI is this unstoppable force for evil. But the research you sent, it wasn't all doom and gloom, was it? There was also this thread about AI being used to actually combat genocide, which honestly feels like, I don't know, kind of a crazy twist. Was that your takeaway too?
It is a bit of a head spinner, isn't it? The same tech, used for such different purposes. But that's the thing about AI. It's a tool, a double-edged sword, really. It can be used to harm, absolutely, but it can also be used to protect. It all depends on us, on how we choose to develop it, to use it.
So how do we make sure it's used for good? How do we use AI to, actually prevent genocide? Because right now, all I can think about are those surveillance systems.
It's about shifting the focus from control to prevention. One of the most, I guess you could say, hopeful applications of AI is in early warning systems. Imagine if you could use AI to analyze, social media posts, news reports, economic trends even, spot those warning signs of genocide before things escalate.
So you'd be looking for those early stages we talked about, classification, symbolization, all that.
Exactly. AI can be trained to recognize patterns in language, right? See how hate speech spreads, monitor high-risk areas for potential violence. It could give humanitarian organizations, governments a chance to actually intervene early.
Before it's too late.
Precisely. But it can't just be about reacting. We also have to address the root of the problem, the hate itself.
Which means tackling hate speech online. Which, let's be honest, feels like trying to put out a fire with more fire. Can AI really make a dent in that?
It's a huge challenge, no doubt. But AI might be able to offer some solutions. Imagine algorithms that are sophisticated enough to, not only flag hateful content, but to understand the context, the intent behind the words.
Because, as we've been saying, there's a big difference between like a heated debate and actual hate speech.
Exactly. And that's where AI could be really valuable. It can analyze huge amounts of data, right? Learn to recognize those subtle linguistic cues, the dog whistles, the coded language.
It's like teaching AI to read between the lines, to understand not just what's being said, but how it's meant and how it could be used to incite violence.
You got it. It's not a silver bullet, of course. But it could be a powerful tool to, at the very least, slow the spread of hate speech online.
So we talked about prevention. But what about protection? Is there a way AI can be used to help those who are most at risk of becoming victims of genocide?
Absolutely. There are some amazing organizations doing work on this right now. The International Rescue Committee, the IRC, for example, they're using AI to personalize assistance for refugees, connecting them with resources, helping them find jobs. It's about using AI to empower those who are most vulnerable to help them rebuild their lives.
It's good to hear that, to hear about AI being used for good. But I think what's become clear through all of this is that technology is just one part of the solution. What else needs to change? I mean, how do we make sure that AI, especially when it comes to something as serious as genocide, is used ethically, responsibly?
It's the question, isn't it? And it's not an easy answer. But it starts with, I think a global conversation. We need clear international regulations, ethical guidelines. We have to prioritize human rights in everything we do with this technology, build in safeguards against misuse from the ground up.
So it's about having a global conversation about AI, about the ethical implications, and making sure those conversations include everyone.
Everyone. Because it's not just on governments. Tech companies, they have a huge role to play too. We need more transparency, more accountability.
It feels like a lot is riding on this. If someone's listening to this right now, what's the most important thing you want them to take away?
That this is everyone's problem. We can't just sit back and assume, technology will fix everything, or that it's all out of our hands. We have to be informed. We have to be engaged. We have to demand better from our leaders, from these tech companies, from ourselves.
We've seen what happens when we let technology outpace our ethics. AI, it has the potential for both incredible good and unthinkable harm. It all comes down to the choices we make today. It's up to all of us to choose wisely.